be here again, although this is not the typical format that we host this program in. I'm really glad that we've been able to adapt this to a webinar format so that we can all get together and provide some continuing education and also have some great conversations about the industry and conversations about the fundamentals of land development. A couple of housekeeping reminders before we begin. Please turn on your video camera if you are expecting to get credit for this. We will be offering licensed surveyor credit, landscape architecture, and engineering credits. All of those you'll have to have your camera on to validate that you're participating, and Becky from MBIA will be checking on that. One other item that we need everyone to do is make sure that you've updated your name on Zoom to be meaningful. So folks who have an initial, or we've got a couple of folks who are listed as iPhone, please make sure that you go to the top right corner of your picture and you can click to change your name. If you need any help with that, drop a message in the chat box and Carrie or Becky can send an email over to you to help provide guidance on how to better do that. That's also necessary for getting your credits. The last kind of item here to mention, just for housekeeping purposes, we will have a slide deck going. Given that the conversation today is very much like a fireside chat of talking about the history of how catastrophes can happen and affect the industry, I'd strongly recommend that you watch this in a side-by-side speaker view. You can change your view by going to the top right corner of your screen, clicking on the view button, then clicking on side-by-side speaker, and then you'll be able to adjust based on the image based on who the speaker is, and you'll see the presentation concurrently. With all of that said, this is the first of a 4-series presentation. Typically, we run this as the fundamentals of land development, but really it seems appropriate to start the lecture series with a conversation about the Law of Black Swans. I'm really excited to be presenting David Thaler today, who is our speaker. He is the managing principal of D.S. Thaler and Associates, a civil and environmental engineering firm that he founded in 1976. We are broadcasting today from David's office in Woodlawn. He's surely the most credentialed engineer in Maryland, so we're very fortunate to have him here with us today. In 2019, he won the highest award nationally for professional engineering in the United States. David is involved with projects of extraordinary complexity, and his firm has designed more than 4,000 land development assignments throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. The firm has extensive experience with large, difficult, and environmentally complex projects and has created many innovative designs. For instance, Thaler invented super silt fence. So if you have ever designed erosion and sediment control, which I'm sure many of you have likely used a byproduct of David Thaler. David is also a fellow of the National Society of Professional Engineers. He is a member of the American Society of Civil Engineers and the Royal Geographic Society in London. He is a board-certified diplomate of both the National Academy of Forensic Engineering and the American Academy of Water Resources Engineering. He was the founding president of the Land Development Council of Maryland, as well as the chair of the Baltimore County Chamber of Commerce. A polymath, he has published more than 250 articles and 5 books on a wide variety of subjects and has lectured at more than a dozen college and universities, including the University of Maryland School of Architecture, Johns Hopkins, and the University of Baltimore School of Law, where he was a visiting scholar. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome David Thaler to the virtual stage.
Thank you so very much, Victoria. It's really my great pleasure today. Victoria and I have had the great pleasure of doing this program. This is now our 6th year, and it's our first doing it virtually. I want to talk a little bit today about surviving pandemics and other black swans, but everybody who's listening in has probably already survived. But I think the advice we'll talk about today will be helpful for the next swans that come forth. Now, my father was on the first HBAM board in 1947, and so in a sense, I was literally born into what is now MBIA, but we joined MBIA as D.S. Thaler Associates, I believe in 1975, which makes us, if not the oldest, then certainly one of the longest continuing members, going on now 46 years. And during that time, I have seen numerous recessions in the housing and real estate markets and have somehow managed to survive them all, and indeed have managed to prosper through all these years. In fact, my wife says the only reason she married me is that she knew that after the nuclear holocaust, the rats, the roaches, and I would probably survive. And so MBIA has asked me to talk about surviving this unprecedented pandemic and how to thrive in the coming new reality. And as they say, I have been to this rodeo before, and so I'd like to share a few thoughts that I hope you'll find helpful. Now, for many years, Victoria and I have had the honor and really the great pleasure of organizing and teaching the land development course for MBIA. And in alternating years, we've tried to cover the basic principles of land development, and then in the next year, more advanced principles. But I always like to start the course with is a discussion of risk, how to recognize it and how to manage it. And I want to present perhaps a new way of thinking about risk, which I like to call the Law of Swans. Now, the land development arena, at least in my view, is a wonderful business. It's one in which a single individual with brains, skill, a hardworking attitude, and a friendly banker can succeed. You can tie up a property for a relatively small deposit, hire an engineer, a lawyer, maybe a few other consultants, and then you can double or perhaps triple the value of the property simply by getting a signature on a piece of paper. Now, it's not just double or triple your investment, the amount you put in, but you can actually double or triple the value of property, which you may not have even taken title to. Now, in land development, you generally start with a raw piece of land, usually unimproved, not always, and then procure what have come to be known as entitlements, simply approvals. When the record plat is signed and recorded, the underlying property becomes much more valuable, almost as if by magic. And so, in a sense, a single piece of paper, a record plat, is literally worth more than its weight in gold, maybe more than its weight in diamonds, perhaps. And the profit margins can be extremely high, but not unexpectedly, so is the risk. Now, as the former Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, who I used to see at Grouse down in St. Michael's where he lived, as he famously said, there are knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. So how do you manage the knowns and the known unknowns in our land development world? Well, there are several very powerful techniques for managing risk. The first, and perhaps the most important, is understand the rules. You cannot play the game successfully unless you completely and fully understand the rules. Read the development regulations, read the zoning code, read all the other applicable regulations. But in our business, and perhaps in all businesses, the most important information is not generally available on the internet. It's sometimes written in pencil in the margins in the zoning office, and sometimes the most important information is not written down at all. For just one example, Baltimore County has what's known as density residential zoning, which is based on the gross area of a property. But you would be very hard pressed to find the definition of gross area, which generally includes half of the road frontage up to 30 feet wide, because it's not in the zoning code. And this can make a huge difference. And so it's very important, if you're not familiar with the customs and interpretations of a particular jurisdiction, to hire someone who is. Secondly, the importance of a feasibility or due diligence study period cannot be overemphasized. It's still astonishing to me how many real estate people believe that just because a property is zoned in a particular way, it can be used for that use. In fact, there is a plethora of regulations, and often because of floodplains, wetlands, forest conservation, and many other regulations, a property cannot be used in the manner for which it is zoned. Zoning is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. and often the full density of a property cannot be achieved. And it's amazing to me how many of our clients have bought a property at auction or tax sale and then come to me, and I've had the unenviable task of telling them that they can't use it for what they thought they could, or worse, it's not developable at all. In fact, if it's at tax sale, that might be a clue that maybe the property has issues. And I sometimes have to gently admonish clients that it really would be better if they had called me before they bought the property at auction. Especially, we don't even charge for such quick feasibilities. And finally, the most powerful technique for managing risk in a land development project is the contingent contract. Really an option, the contract does not obligate the buyer to go hard or to settle unless certain conditions are met. And if the buyer is buying a property based upon achieving a certain use, the contract would not obligate him or her to close until those approvals for that use has been achieved. But what about the unknowns? We call those black swans. And these are the issues that can't be foreseen and seem to come out of nowhere. Now, they're called black swans because until Captain Cook discovered Australia, it was believed that all swans were white, and so no Englishman could have predicted that there were actually black swans down under in the world. Now, black swan is a term popularized by Nassim Taleb, a finance minister, in a 2007 book just prior to the 2008 financial crisis. A black swan is an extremely rare event with severe consequences that cannot be predicted beforehand. Now, I've lived through quite a few of these. Many of us close to my age also have. In 1987, beginning with Old Court Savings and Loan in Maryland, the entire savings and loan industry nationally, on which home building used to depend, collapsed. On September 11, 2001, hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center in Pentagon, setting off a deep recession. And in 2008, beginning with the failure of Lehman Brothers, we entered what has been called the Great Recession, a long recessionary period that felt like it only recently ended. And in early 2002, of course, we have the COVID-19 pandemic. So the question is this: if black swans are so rare, why do they seem to happen so often? And by the way, if 100-year storms are only supposed to occur every 100 years, why do we seem to have them fairly regularly? Now, the answer could be called the Law of Swans, but the concept of black swans isn't always improbably bad events. There are also improbably good events, and this has an actual name in the literature. The Law of Miracles, it's called, and it was created by British mathematician John Littlewood. It posits that in our waking hours, we see and hear things happening at a rate of about 1 per second, which works out to be about 1 million per month. And the chance of a miracle, something good with a low probability of happening, is about 1 per million events. And therefore, he posits, we should expect about 1 miracle per month. Now, I'm not sure that I buy this math, but I think he got the concept right. But the same is also true of terrible things: 100-year floods, financial meltdowns, hurricanes, Bernie Madoff, pandemics, recessions, depressions, political chaos at home or abroad, even war. Now, I've been a reasonably successful investor through the years, and if you indulge me, I just want to take a moment to share some advice that I have found very useful. And it was Lord Rothschild during the Napoleonic Wars who said, "Buy on the sound of cannons, but sell on the sound of trumpets." It was very good advice then. It still is. Last Thursday and Friday in the stock market, we held a meltdown. It was an overreaction to rising interest rates. It was a good time to buy. Now, to call a storm a 100-year event doesn't really mean it happens once every 100 years. It means it has a 1% chance of happening in any given year, which are pretty good odds, really. I'd like those for the lottery. The chances of any one of the infinite multitude of terrible things happening is reassuringly low, but the chances of something bad happening in any given year is pretty high. And the law of miracles tells us to expect something improbably good once a month, but also to expect something improbably bad roughly as often. Now, I like to think of this as Thaler's Law of Swans. Terrible things that cannot be predicted and come out of nowhere we call black swans. But our industry, the building and real estate industry, is cyclical. And as we suffer recessions regularly, we should probably call them gray swans. These are the known unknowns. We know they are out there, we just don't know when they're going to occur. But as the law of miracles suggests that unexpectedly good things will also happen, I like to call these golden swans. And as for housing, we are surely in a golden swan now. Every morning as I work out, not enough usually, I watch Squawk Box on the Financial Channel, and I listen to economists of every stripe and persuasion make predictions. The economy was booming in February 2020 with unemployment at a 50-year low, and not one of the distinguished economists predicted the coming economic catastrophe. It was John Maynard Keynes, the great British economist, who said that the only reason for economists to make predictions is to give astrologers credibility. And it was Thomas Hobbes who wrote that the best prophet is the best guesser. They are both right, because the future not only cannot be accurately predicted, because no one knows what the future will be, but the future itself hasn't decided what it's going to be and is much more random than we would like to admit. But there's also a very human trait that we should be aware of. And it's probably wired into our evolutionary lizard brains, but you can observe it pretty clearly every morning when the economists make their predictions. That is the tendency to believe that the near future will be very similar to the present, and whatever trend line we're on will be extended, just a little more this or a little less. That whatever trend we're on will continue is an absolute certainty, of course, until it isn't. And sometimes we comport ourselves proceeding along whatever trend line we're on until still, like Wile E. Coyote chasing the run rotor off the cliff in the old cartoons, we look down and there's nothing below. So here's the thing about black swans and the real estate industry. They're really not so rare. They're all different, but in our world, they come pretty regularly, usually every 10 years or so, and usually after a long bull market run and a period of wild exuberance. So why are we so shocked when they arrive? The hard truth is we live in a constant state of uncertainty, and our industry is a cyclical one, and our very first step to survival is to recognize that. And so the first lesson in surviving a COVID-19 pandemic and all such swans is to expect and prepare from them. We don't know when a recession is going to come. We don't know how deep it's going to be, and we don't know how long it's going to last. But as Jon Snow said famously in Game of Thrones, winter is coming. In fact, winter is always coming. So the most important strategy for surviving a recession, whether caused by pandemic or anything else, is to prepare for it, because one is coming whether we like it or not. And the secret to survival is no great mystery. It's simply to have resiliency. As Bill Gates put it, save like a pessimist, but invest like an optimist. You can only be an optimist in the long run if you are pessimistic to survive in the short run. Have sufficient cash reserves and an emergency fund, and arrange a line of credit when you don't need it. The old joke is that the banks want to lend to you when you don't need the money, but as soon as you do need it, they want it back. But it's not really a joke. Almost all bank loans have covenants associated with them, which must be maintained. And so when there is a financial crisis of some sort and you most need the money, the bank wants it back. And then, of course, there is the power of relationships. Ours here in Maryland is a very small industry. And while the economy may be cyclical, our relationships and relations will transcend and may last a career and a lifetime. Now, the main reason companies go out of business is obvious, but it's not so well understood. In boom times, companies grow and take on fixed costs, payroll, rent, cars, computers, whatever. Employees too. In good times, they buy bigger homes with bigger mortgages and bigger cars and bigger car loans. And then when the tide turns, as it inevitably does, they aren't able to shed expenses fast enough to match their costs to the new revenue reality. Warren Buffett famously said that when the tide runs out, you see who's swimming naked. And what he means is that when there is a recession and revenues are impaired, you see who can cover their fixed expenses. They're not, in the vernacular of the industry. I'm afraid that many businesses and institutions that were barely hanging on before the pandemic are not going to make it before this recession is fully over. Now, I want to take a very short digression into statistics. Now, statistics is a powerful tool, but it can only measure the probability of something occurring that has previously occurred. If we want to figure the probability of someone being a certain height among a given cohort, we could simply plot all the heights, and typically we would find the heights would vary somewhere from 4'10" to maybe 6'10". And they would form this familiar bell curve and the normal distribution around a mean. Now we can analyze the dispersion of the heights by using a statistical measure, the standard deviation, and we can say that 66% of the heights fall within one standard deviation of the mean, 95% fall within two standard deviations, and 99% will fall within three deviations of the mean. Now, likewise, we can measure historic rainfall, and we can calculate the estimated size of a 100-year storm, a storm with a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. And through statistical analysis, we don't have to wait 100 years to be able to do so. And we can even estimate the probability of a 500-year storm or even a 1,000-year storm, even though there's no record from someone being alive when that occurred. Now, we might even be able to calculate the probability of a large asteroid hitting the Earth. That probability is extremely low, but it's not zero. And it has certainly happened before, and it will certainly happen again. But we can't calculate the probability of, say, aliens landing because it's never happened. And I like to illustrate the principle this way. Suppose you had a very mathematically inclined turkey. And suppose he was very interested in calculating the probability of when he was going to be fed. And the very nice lady would come out every day at about noon and feed the turkey. And he would keep very careful records, and he would see that some days she would come out at about 11:30, and maybe some days she'd come out at 12:30, and he could plot the probability of his getting fed at any particular time. And that probability works perfectly until Thanksgiving Day. And that's his swan. The Thanksgiving Day, the probability of his being the lunch instead of getting lunch cannot be predicted. So that's the thing with economic gray swans. We know they're going to happen, but we don't know when or how deep. And we can only prepare for them by building robust, resilient systems. So what's the right strategy for surviving a pandemic? It's to hunker down, conserve cash, reduce payroll if necessary, maintain your core competencies, shed unnecessary expenses, and survive to fight another day. So, however, here's the other thing about black swans. They provide opportunity. As they say, it separates the men from the boys, the wheat from the chaff, and the strong from the weak. To say it more technically, it's called the Matthew effect, which is sometimes stated as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. This is an actual concept in sociology, especially in the sociology of education and learning. It was first coined by sociologist Robert Merton in 1968, and is perhaps best understood as the strong get stronger. It's the powerful effect of accumulated advantage and comes from the parable of the talents in the Gospel of Matthew, which says To the one who has more, more shall be given. Now, recessions flush out the weak and provide great opportunities for the strong. But then there are the golden swans. It was Morty Max, president of the home builders, the predecessor to MBIA, and a legendary home builder himself, who once said, "Our industry goes through roughly 10-year cycles. 3 years of the cycle are pretty lousy, 3 or 4 are mediocre, but it's those last 3 that make it well worth waiting for." We are in such a period now. Housing is not just hot, it's red hot, it's white hot. Housing is having its best year since 2006, and sales and starts are literally off the chart. Now, all recessions are different, and the new reality is going to be considerably changed in ways we cannot fully anticipate. But in another life, I trained as an economist. In fact, I studied briefly with Milton Friedman just before we won the Nobel Prize in economics, the first Nobel Prize in economics. And so I can't resist the urge to make a few projections and maybe to give some astrologers more credibility. So please indulge me as I try a few predictions of what the future might bring. Traditional brick and mortar retail is going to shrink. Traditional retail was already struggling before the pandemic as online sales hurt the brick and mortar retailers. During the stay-at-home orders, everyone became comfortable with home delivery of most everything, which is convenient, fast, and cheap. And already J.Crew, Abercrombie and Fitch, JCPenney, among many others, have filed for bankruptcy. There will be more, but the redevelopment of failed malls and other struggling retail presents a tremendous opportunity. These retail areas are the new cornfields for us, a source of needed land for housing development and redevelopment. Now, office will also be greatly affected. Many of us have worked from home and are surprised how convenient and efficient it can be, and employers love the cost savings. Last February, only 3.4% of employees were working remotely, but by April of 2020, 42% were, and according to a recent study, 65% of employees don't want to go back to the office. Now, many people will want to continue, which will reduce the demand for traditional office space. On the other hand, many will miss the social and collaborative elements in a traditional office and can't wait to get out of the house and away from the kids and go back. Now, my guess, demand for office will decline to maybe roughly 70% of what it once was. Not everybody wants to work remotely, but some do. Now, infrastructure. State tax revenues have been ravaged. The states and local jurisdictions will be hard-pressed to lay off employees, but the first will be non-essential infrastructure projects. Now, the House in the last day or so just passed a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. Just to put that into perspective, that exceeds the economy, the annual economy of Canada, and is just about the annual economy of Italy. And this is just one bill. This is going to generate a huge amount of income into the world, and it remains to be seen how much goes to the states and the municipalities and what will be used for infrastructure. Anecdotally, we know that quite a lot of the engineering firms that do infrastructure work have laid off employees, but we will see what the future brings. Now, traffic is likely to be another big change that will affect housing and the world that we work in positively. With more people working from home, traffic volumes will likely decrease and come off their historic relentless upward trend. And there will likely be, this will result also in probably new road construction. And then we come to housing. Housing, however, is in a golden swan. Every other recession that I can recall has been led either by high interest rates or the failure of financial institutions. I can painfully remember when prime in the late 1980s and 90s was 21.5%. It's almost unbelievable to recall that now, and 30-year mortgages topped out just over 16%. Compared to December 2019, housing starts are up 5% and permits are up 19%. This is the highest level of starts and permits since 2006. And in the Baltimore region, the pace of resales is simply astounding. Throughout the region, this is resales now, properties on average spent only 11 days on the market, 7 days on the market in Carroll and Harford County, and an absolutely astonishing only 5 days on the market in Owings Mills. I talked to one of our friends who had a home for sale in Baltimore County, and in a 3-day period, they had 110 showings and 10 contracts in that a period, all above asking. It's unbelievable. The pace is unprecedented and a golden swan, driven, of course, by low interest rates, flight to the suburbs, the millennials coming of age, and of course, the limited supply. The housing industry, at least in my career, has typically led the economy into recession. Not this time. Interest rates are essentially zero. The 10-year Treasury was 3.1%. The last time I'm sorry, I'll scratch that. The 10-year Treasury was 0.3% in the early part of the year and is now approximately 1.3%. 15 and 30-year mortgages of this writing are just over 3%. And at some point, when the Federal Reserve decides to take its finger off the scale, rates are likely to rise because of the tremendous amount of borrowing undertaken by the Treasury. I would predict that by the end of 2021, 10-year rates will be at about 2%, and by 2022, I would expect there to be some inflation in the economy and 10-year Treasuries to be closer to 4% by the end of that year. Now, in the future, inflation may well overshoot the Federal Reserve's stated target of 2%. But counterintuitively, rising interest rates will initially be good for housing. There's been a 20-year bull market in bonds as interest rates have fallen and bond prices risen, but that's in our rearview mirror now. Interest rates, in my view, will ultimately creep up, and this will help motivate potential buyers who will want to buy a house and take on a mortgage before interest rates rise further. We have seen this behavior before. Now, there's been a tremendous increase in the money supply known as M1 since the COVID disruptions began. In just the first few months of the pandemic, the increase in the money supply was more than the entire increase after the 1987 recession. And also there are now new forms of money that we don't usually think about or include in the traditional measures. Cryptocurrencies, frequent flyer miles, Hilton honors, and all the like. All that money sloshing around has to find a home, and part of that will be buying new cars and new homes. Bear with me for just a moment. Just having a wee bit of IT trouble. Now, housing is booming. Builders are running out of inventory, as we all know. They can't raise prices fast enough, and 2021 should be a near record-setting year for the home building. The threats will be the lack of land, increasing regulatory and political obstacles, especially here in Maryland. So I want everybody to celebrate the good times, but let's not forget Thaler's other law: winter is coming, for winter is always coming. At some point when we least expect it, another black swan will arrive and the party will be over. Now, I want to go a little further out on a limb and predict what the next black swan will be. Almost overnight, many of us have begun working remotely from home, possibly using VPN networks with somewhat lax security, to say the least. This has not gone unnoticed, I assure you, by hackers, cyber criminals, and foreign governments. The water system of the city of Oldsmar, Florida, was recently compromised as a hacker caused the amount of lye added to the water to be dangerously increased. There are more than 50,000 water supply systems, municipal generally, in the US, and there are no standards for cybersecurity. We are now so internet dependent that the next war is likely to be a cyber one. I strongly suggest you follow all the safety protocols to guard your important data, back up, back up, back up, have firewalls, and get cyber insurance. And don't just rely on the cloud. You heard it here first. Enjoy the golden swan, and thank you for your attention. Victoria, questions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David, for that presentation. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? So let me see the participants list. Folks, you can either take your microphone off, or you can either take your microphone off, or you can drop it in the chat box if you have any questions. I see a question from Ben Sage here, David. Can you elaborate on how local government budgets will affect logistics? Ben, what do you mean by logistics? If you'd like, you can just turn your microphone on and you can just talk directly through your microphone. We've got a small enough group.
Yeah, it was referring to David's slide where he was going through the different forecasts for the various real estate types.
Ben, can you hear me?
Yes,
Ben?
David.
Okay. I think your question is, you're a better predictor than I am. I should be asking you, but what are my predictions for logistics? Logistics are big. Logistics is warehousing. You know, logistics is Amazon. I mean, it's clear to me that brick and mortar is dead largely, not exactly dead, but it's going to shrink as we have gotten used to having everything, you know, ordered online and delivered to our house. So I think if you're in the logistics business, the warehousing business, if you're not in a golden swan yet, you're going to be.
And it looked like you related something about local government budgets within that that same slide. So I wasn't sure how that related.
Well, that's a $64,000 question. We are likely to have a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. It's huge. How much goes to infrastructure projects, if anything, and how much goes to the states and municipalities? I haven't seen the bill yet, so I'm not sure. But here's what I think I am sure of. This is throwing an unprecedented amount of money into the economy. The savings rate, which is typically 3%, 4%, is now running at about 20%. The vaccines are just now becoming readily available. And I might be a little optimistic, but Memorial Day or so, we might be out of this COVID. And there is a unbelievable pent up demand. People have household incomes are flush, really, with the money that's come from the stimulus, and everybody wants to spend it, get out of town. They want to go to bars and restaurants and on vacations. And I think we're going to have a real boom in the economy, which will also help add to employment, which will even further increase demand for housing. That's a very good question. Any more?
So Jeremy Rudder dropped a question in the box here. And David, I don't know that you're the right audience for this question. Maybe Carrie or Becky could chime in. Do we have any members that are providers of cyber insurance? And Jeremy, to that, I would say if we don't, it seems like there's a good new target audience to recruit for MBIA membership. But Carrie or Becky, do you know off the top of your heads if we have any members that are that provide cyber insurance?
Hey, Victoria. So let me take my video. So Becky can't speak on the way she's logged in watching, but we had in the beginning of everybody staying at home last year, a member, and maybe I'll jog some of your memories. I remember his name's Chris Razmidian. Is this ringing a bell for anyone? And I'm blanking on what exactly their company is, but I believe they might do that. And if they don't, they're the perfect somebody and recruit them for membership. So
and Carrie,
hold that thought. And
Becky actually just messaged and indicated that Chuck Wise, who is on the call, provides that service. Chuck, are you available?
Perfect.
Well, I want to give, I don't know
perfect.
Mr. Wise, but I want to give another plug on this. We have all sort of bootstrapped computer systems to work virtually since the pandemic began. These are very vulnerable. There's a lot of ransomware out there. There's a lot, I don't have to tell you how much phishing and hacking goes on. Give your IT guy a raise. Don't depend on the cloud. One day the cloud's going to be hacked. I know so little about IT, but I know you need to back up. You need to back up offsite, and I cannot recommend cyber insurance highly enough. We're all very vulnerable.
David, barring no other questions, I mean, how do you think that housing affordability plays into the current climate that we're in with a housing boom happening?
Well, I think it's, housing affordability is terrible. So, I mean, Ben would know better than I, but I think prices were up 7% last year. There's been, in the last few months, there's been tremendous inflation in housing prices of all types. Multifamily starts are down, single family starts are up. Largely, people are moving to the suburbs to get away from crowded conditions. And the FHA programs, the HUD programs on affordable housing have tremendous opposition generally to them. On one site in Baltimore County called the Enclave in Owings Mills, a project of 56 affordable units, tax credit units. It was agreed by the administrative law judge that it met all the rules and regulations, and yet the county executive wrote a letter and said, this doesn't meet our policy, even though that wasn't quite correct, and it was denied. There's another one going on in Towson called Red Maple, likely to be approved, I think, but it has had a 5-day hearing with bitter community opposition. So I think there's the future looks good for very good for housing, but not so much for affordable housing.
David, Peyton Morin from M&T Bank just indicated that he has a question. Peyton, you can turn off your mic and ask your question.
Hi, Victoria. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Peyton.
Perfect. Thank you, David. Thank you, Victoria, for inviting me to this. This has been great. I've got a question that I think David will think is fun to think through. David, you are so good at looking out for younger up and coming professionals, and you've helped me in my career. My question to you regarding swans is, you know, a lot of younger folks who aren't yet used to the ebbs and flows of these cycles, we sort of fall into one of two categories, neither of which allows us to prepare to take advantage of these swan opportunities. The first issue is like a Wile E. Coyote issue, where we get wrapped up in what everybody else is doing, and before we know it, the floor falls out from beneath us and we're in a bad position. Or someone like me, who's a little bit more conservative by nature, will want to avoid catching a falling knife and won't pull the trigger when things are scary, but when the opportunity is available. So my question is, how do you think, what would your advice be for a younger person who wants to figure out how to steel themselves so that they have enough confidence to act during a swan in an intelligent way that's not reckless?
Boy, that's a tough question. Well, first of all, I want to give Peyton a plug. Peyton's my banker. Okay, he's a wonderful banker with M&T Bank. And if you need any commercial funding, if you need anything related to the finance world, I'll call Peyton. And if you can't find him, drop me an email and I'll tell you. I think we're all creatures of the financial environments that we come of age in. It took me a long time to get over interest rates, CD interest rates being 18% and mortgages being 16%. And for years and years and years, I just sort of struggled. I was sure that everything was going to go back the way it was. And how could we have 3% interest rates, mortgage rates, and 4%? But the lesson of the world, if there's anything you take from, what I've said today, is the world is cyclical. On the way up, take advantage of it. Okay, make hay while the sun shines. It's a gift. Take advantage of it, but don't get too big a mortgage, too big a car loan, too big a nut, as they say, because inevitably it will turn. We're in a cyclical business, and you have to have the resilience to be able to ride that out. So don't let your fixed expenses, when you get a raise, that's great. Put some of it away. Prepare for the next step because it's always there. You have to, the lesson to young people and old people is to take advantage of the golden swans, the great times. You have to ride out the bad times because they will come. Peyton, did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yes, thank you, David. And I worry that for someone like me, if I'm being pessimistic, I won't ever feel confident enough to pull the trigger when the world feels like it's falling apart, but when, there might be great investment opportunities.
Well, last Thursday and Friday were a good opportunity. Stock market overreacted to a very slight rise in interest rates and went down 1,000%. Okay, the pessimist, sells. The optimist says that's an overreaction and buy. And what you should do is buy a little.
Thank you, David. Yes, very good.
If you want me to manage your portfolio, just come on over. I'll help you.
Roger that.
Anybody else?
Questions? I don't have any other questions in the chat box here, David. Do you have any closing words?
Yeah, these are the land development business is really a wonderful a business. If you want to do a car company, you want to start a car company, you got to be Elon Musk, and spend a couple $2 billion. If you want to be a land developer, you can do it. You can do it out of your basement, and plenty of people do. And there has never been a better time to do it. Land developers sell to national merchant builders. They cannot, the national merchant builders are selling the houses faster than they get the permits for them. There has never been a better time. And that would be my advice. We're in a golden swan, take advantage of it. But remember, 2-3 years from now, winter's coming. That's all I have. I wish everybody the very best of luck. We're going to run the program for three more sessions. It's going to be every other Tuesday. And the dates are March 16th, March 30th, and February 13th. We're going to get a little bit back to our traditional format. And the next two sessions Victoria and I are going to do will be orientation to the land development process. This will be the basic principles of land development with emphasis on feasibility. In April, on April 13th, also a Tuesday at lunch, we're going to talk about the crisis in housing, which is really the crisis in affordable housing, and some interesting things that are being done about it all over the country. And we're going to call the session Crisis in Housing, Vanquishing the Ghost of Euclid. And if you don't know what Euclid is, see you in April. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it.
David, thank you so much. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have one person. Mike Wendland, do you want to unmute yourself, Mike? So we can talk. I think, Victoria, are you still here? Or did
I
you
am
leave?
still here.
I think they left. Oh, okay, good. I was hoping once everybody gets off, we had one person have a little bit of a problem. So hold on.
Looks like we still have quite a few people logged in here, but it'll just be another moment.
Yep.